Hello. I recently finished reading a new multi-generational family saga that I found very moving and impactful, and all the more poignant because of a crazy coincidence that occurred immediately after I finished reading this book. So the story follows three generations of a Franco-Algerian family called the Cassars from the midst of World War II till recent times, till 2010. So roughly 60 or 70 years of this family's history. And before I get into more details about it, I'll explain about the coincidence that I experienced, because inevitably reading any family saga, I get thinking about my own family history and what I know or what I don't know about their past. And I think we all experience this at some point and wonder about this, because no matter how close we are to our families or how much documentation we have, we can never really know and completely understand everything that our parents went through, that our grandparents went through, that our great-grandparents went through. And I wonder sometimes about that family story that led to me being here. But reading a family saga stirs up all of these like questions and pondering this family history again. So I was already thinking about my own family's past. But when I finished reading this, I went in and looked at my email, and there was a message from my mother and sister sending me audio files of my grandfather, who has been long deceased, but at some point my father and other members of my family interviewed him about his life, about his childhood, about how his parents moved from Latvia to America, and that experience, but also different stages of his life, of his education, and how he served in World War II as well. He was a doctor. He was there at D-Day, not on the shores, but on the ship, and so I started listening to these audio files, which were quite extensive, of him describing different periods of his life and different aspects of our family history. And I must not have heard his voice for at least 25 or 30 years, and but just hearing the sound of his voice again suddenly took me back to my childhood and the experience of interacting with him, of this man who was quite like nice and gentle, but also, you know, quite a imposing authorial figure, who you know, was a real manly man. He did a lot of hunting and you know, is a real outdoorsy type. And so this figure from my childhood that I knew very little about, and suddenly getting all this more detail about his life, and so that was so moving, and also, yeah, just such a mad coincidence to occur after thinking about it. I'm reading this family story. So this it's not surprising that this kind of triggered all of these thoughts, because the author, Claire Messud, unsurprisingly based a lot of this novel, or played off from her own family history and drawing from elements of it, but it is a fiction. You know, she's completely made up a lot of these details and characters, and a lot of the plot points of this story, which there are like a lot of like surprising things which occur over a period of time. And so we follow different points in this family's life, and it'll explain a certain period, show a certain period from the points of view of a few few different characters before leaping forward in time, and then we get a few more points of view about what has happened since then, and we keep moving through periods of time, moving up towards the present, and during those circles of time that are explored, we get memories of each character's past, but also projections of the future, and the preoccupations of their present, and their projections about the future, and the future that might have been, of course, because at all stages of life we think of, oh, if I'd made a different decision at a certain point in my life, maybe things would have turned out differently, and maybe things would have turned out differently for my entire family. And the story begins with the grandparents of the story, Gaston and Lucienne, who are separated amidst the war, because Gaston is stationed in Greece, and Lucienne is with their two children, Francois and Denise, and I'm trying to move them to safety, and to stay with different members of their family. And in each of these grandparents, Gaston and Lucienne, are naturally stressed and worrying, because they are in the midst of World War II, and nobody knows what is going to happen, of who is going to ultimately triumph. And so it's a guessing game of making choices that they hope are the best for their family, but they don't really know how it's going to play out. And I think that's something that this novel gets so well, like throughout every stage of history, that it portrays that in the present time that the characters are inhabiting, they are really just doing the best they can, and really don't know what the outcome is going to be. And of course, we, knowing broad periods of history, can understand like, oh no, don't do that, or maybe you should do this other thing. But of course, at the time, they don't know that. But there are also so many pockets of history that this novel explores, which I wasn't familiar with and didn't know all that much about, and that made me want to read more about it. So even though Gaston and Lucienne are really the stronghold of and central figures of this family and its lineage, their children, Francois and Denise, are really the central characters of the story, because we follow their lives from their early life till much later in their lives. So they're the only characters, even though we get the grandchildren's perspectives later on in the novel, and more towards the present time. Really, only Denise and Francois, we get the full trajectory of their lives. And so I think they're really at the center of this book. And it's so fascinating how this family isn't limited to one area of the world, and it shows you in the very beginning on maps. So from at the very beginning of the novel, we get how the family is scattered amidst World War II, from Algeria to France to Greece to Beirut, and following their lives. But then following the family through different generations, really they span across the globe, and it points to the various cities and places that the family resides at different times in their lives, through taking different jobs, through meeting different partners, through having aspirations to study and to live elsewhere. So they go from Toronto to the United States, to Buenos Aires, to different various points in Europe, from London to France, to Algeria and Morocco, but also over to Australia as well. Some of the family lived there at different points, and so it's really how this family is like spread across the globe to experience all these different pockets of history that are occurring around the world. And so we follow larger political and social changes that are occurring over time, but also what this novel gets so well, I think, is like economic transformations in the world as well, and how that works in tandem with these other larger changes, and especially following through different jobs that members of the family take over time, how industry is changing amidst and after World War II, how really the results of that really dictated how different countries developed or stagnated over a period of time. And we get little glimpses of this from the search for oil and the development of industry and technological developments over time, and I think it's really fascinating how it traces that, and the way family members get involved in these different areas of industry, not always through their own desires. Usually it's much more out of like necessity, of because this is a way to earn money and to support their family. And so there's a family member who's an aspiring writer and who has written a novel which just languishes in a drawer after having it be rejected, and but not being able to pursue this creative endeavor that's very important to them because of the necessity of having to find a job and to support the family. And I think, like any family saga that includes many different characters and many different members of the family across different generations, it does feel like at some points that we get too brief an amount of some characters' stories, and so there were certain characters and situations that I did want to know more about, but because of the story, the momentum of the story, that it was moving forwards in time, that it wasn't able to stick with them. But like I said, I feel like, the real center of the story is Francois and Denise, as we follow them throughout their entire life, and that kind of reflects the title of this novel, this strange, eventful history, which comes from the famous Shakespeare play As You Like It. And the title is a line taken from the most famous speech from that play, narrated by Jacques, the 7 Ages of Man monologue that begins with "All the world's a stage," and goes on to describe how, if we're lucky enough to live to the later years of our life, we will all go through 7 ages, or 7 different stages. And the final lines of that monologue are, "Last scene of all, that ends this strange eventful history, is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything." And so this novel is doing that, of describing the parents in this family through all of these different ages of their lives. But it doesn't even describe the most dramatic events in their lives and what they go through. What we get more are the in-between stages and transitionary stages of their life, rather than these big dramatic moments of life-changing moments in their life. We have to piece together things that have occurred in between the years, which are described, which in some ways makes it even more dramatic, than if we were in the heat of battle of World War II, or amidst a couple's breakup, or a death in the family, and experiencing that firsthand. More just like the resonance and the memories and how this has impacted their lives and goes on having an effect on them over time. And I found it was especially melancholy following Francois's character and the trajectory of his life, but also Denise. I found an absolutely fascinating character, and my favorite scene of this book is when she is living in Buenos Aires, and she is quite like solitary and feels distance from a lot of other people, and she finds real solace and comfort in a bookstore that she regularly starts going to and then starts working in, and then forms a connection with the owner of that bookstore, who is a German woman who moved there before World War II, and so has very strong feelings and about what is going on in Europe, but also about wanting to form connections and maintain communication amongst people from all different nationalities, and but how that relationship between them develops over time, and what occurs between them, I think is so fascinating. And you also get tantalizing little glimpses of Borges drops into the bookshop every once in a while, and so Denise has some interactions with him, but then also in like literary terms, later on in the novel, one of the characters is it's during the period around the time when the Satanic Verses came out of Salman Rushdie's novel, and the character is contemplating and wondering what is going to happen to Salman Rushdie, how he's going to have to live his life in fear that he might be killed at any time. And so a second like big coincidence about this book is that it was published like around about the same time that Salman Rushdie's memoir Knife was published this year, of course, describing the horrible attack that he sustained, in which he lost sight in one eye, in which he almost died. And so it was a strange thing, like reading that section and then thinking about then what later occurred, and understanding this period of history from a different perspective. And I got such a powerful sense through reading this family's story about how we are all like caught up in different periods of history, and we are in some ways ignorant about the time in which we're living in, that we can understand bits and pieces of it and of our own family story and larger history, but we can't know everything about it. And so at one point a character muses with the line, history is always around us and in us. And it feels like that is what this novel is expressing so much, that we are completely surrounded by this history, which is dictated the circumstances under which we live in, but is also in us through the family that created us, through the past generations that led to us, but how we also have our own sense of agency and willpower to shape and steer the future through our own actions. And so I found that very moving, and also the details of this family story, which are so finely wrought throughout the book. I found it very well written, and just a beautiful story. How it all comes together, and the very surprising ending. I'm not going to give anything away, but yeah, big details are revealed towards the end of this book that was quite a big shock to me. So I think it's a really great novel, and inevitably probably my feelings are made a bit more intense because of the coincidence that occurred after I finished reading this this novel and then hearing my own grandfather's voice and feeling like I was getting some insight into his life and experience that I hadn't known before, and the only kind of insight that I'll probably ever have since he's long gone. So I would love to hear if you have read this novel, what you think about it, or if you're interested in reading it now, or if there are any other family sagas or coincidences that have occurred when you've been reading a book that have really affected your experience of reading that book. I'd love to hear about that in the comments below. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.